Hey, it's Joe, and I just wanted to share with you a webinar I did with Kobiton a few weeks ago on how to make the transition from manual testing to automated testing and eventually to AI-based automation, machine learning type test automation. It was a great chat. We had Paul Grizzaffi with us, Praveen Bhasker, and Frank Moyer. And a lot of cool insights here. Just wanted to share with you because I think there's some things you should know about as we make the transition over, I think, eventually completely to AI-based type AI test automation efforts. You don't want to miss it? Check it out.
All right. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Drew. I am the marketing manager for Kobiton. Again, welcome to our webinar today, Making the Jump, Manual to Automation, Automation to Autonomous. Today, we will really be focusing on helping testing teams who may feel they're stuck in a rut of manual testing only go ahead and make the transition to more efficient and productive methods via automation testing. And then those of you that are already doing automation testing, we're going to explore the possibilities and benefits of AI and ML. So with that being said, without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists here. We're joined by a great cast today. We've got Frank Moyer, the CTO of Kobiton. We've got Mr. Joe Colantonio, who is the founder of both Test Talks and Guild Conferences. We've also got Paul Grizzaffi, who's the principal automation architect at Magenic. And then lastly, we've got Praveen Bhasker, who is the former senior manager of enterprise automation at Office Depot. So great crowd today. Should hear a lot of wonderful information for everyone. Let's go ahead and get into the very first topic. Manual testing, is it necessary or is it antiquated? And we will go ahead and start with you, Frank.
Thank you very much, Drew, and thank you, Kobiton, for hosting this webinar. Before we go into too much detail, I'd like to first provide some clarification on semantics. With manual testing, or to say it another way, a human executing a test script, I think it needs to be broken down further. Broadly, testing performed by a human can be either checking or exploratory testing. And manually checking and exploratory testing are both manual testing, but they're different. Exploratory testing is a mindset and requires thinking, while manual testing does not. With those semantics, exploratory testing, in my view, is and will always be necessary, no matter how far artificial intelligence takes us. There will always be a need to perform some level of exploratory testing. Even as I was on a call yesterday about a mobile app that I was advising on, and they have a human component in it. And even there, the goal is that 1 out of every 30 things that the machine checks, we're still going to send to the human just to make sure that it stays, the algorithms are correct. So moving on to the second part of the question, advantage or hindrance, in my view, there's having a thorough exploratory test strategy provides a level of quality above straight automation and does provide an advantage. However, right now, manual checking, that second part, puts the brakes on a release cycle, and it is the greatest impediment to continuous testing. So with the acceleration of development release cycles from months to weeks to days to hours, updating automation scripts and organizations, they revert back to manual checking. And this becomes increasingly burdensome on the organization, especially in mobile, where testing on real devices is imperative. So this has led one of our partners, for example, to build an integration with Kobiton, where they can record a script, set up an automation script pretty quickly, and execute that automation script on 50 devices in parallel. So that's a good example of where it's used effectively.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank. With that said, we will go ahead and switch over to Paul. Go ahead and share your insights.
So I agree largely with what Frank was saying. In my career time, and in probably my kids' career time, and they're only 5. So with manual, quote in quotes, manual testing, human eyes and interaction on the software is going to be necessary, just because there are things that machines cannot do for us today. And there are things that machines should not be doing for us today. And then there's a big pile of stuff that maybe the machines could do, but it's not cost effective. And if we look at automation as being a force multiplier, helping the teams get the software out the door at an acceptable level of quality and acceptable level of risk, then what we're looking at is it not being business wise a good choice to go all automated or even go all human interaction. There's a sweet spot in there. Looking at the continuous testing pipeline, we hear a lot of companies talking about we're going to go every check-in. It's a push out to production. That's great if you want to do that. If you want to have that level of frictionless code deployed to production, you can do it without having a human actually look at the code, but you're incurring a risk. And the risk is that your automations miss something, and it's a pretty good risk. It's a pretty hefty risk. Companies that do that really need to have tolerant users, or they need to be able to have a low cost of change and probably a low cost of failure as well. Because if either one of those is pretty high, then the chances are it's not the right way for you to go with something like no humans looking at it at all.
Great insights, Paul. We'll move on to Joe.
Awesome. Yeah, so for some reason, every time I hear manual testing or automated testing now, I just think of Michael Bolton, the tester, and he goes crazy about this stuff. So I just think about what Frank mentioned about semantics. When we talk about testing, there really is no manual or automated testing, is what Michael Bolton would say, the same way a doctor doesn't do like automated doctoring and manual doctoring. So I really think that really just sets the mindset that it doesn't really matter what type of test you do, as long as it's finding value, it's finding risk, and it's helping your customers. That being so, that's why I would never say that it's antiquated. We'll always need exploratory testing. It's definitely going to be necessary. Also, as Paul mentioned, it really is based on your context. So I work for a large medical organization. So in that type of situation, you probably want to have some manual eyeballs on your application before it's deployed, just to make sure everything's all right, because you have lives at stake. But if you had just a simple application, the risk is minimal, you probably could get away with all automated tests. So it really does matter on your situation. It's really different mine from yours. So it really is a team decision on what they need to go with. So manual can become an advantage, like I said, when you're dealing with these types of applications. It really is a hindrance, like once again, like what Paul mentioned, it's if you need to do test coverage against multiple devices, multiple operating systems, all these different types of things, it's probably better to have an automated test suite to be able to get that coverage against all the browsers. And then maybe you just have a few exploratory tests that go through and get a human's point of view. So it really is a marriage of both. I don't think that they're either mutually exclusive. I think you use both approaches in your testing plan to get the best type of quality in the hands of your customer to make sure that you're delivering quality software. So those are my main points that I think go with both automated and manual tests.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And Praveen, how about your insights here?
Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. I kind of agree with Frank because there's a very thin insulation layer between manual and exploratory testing, right? And if you see, it all depends on what you want to achieve in the organization. So let's say you want to test a legacy application which is in the path of getting replaced in the future, maybe 6 months down the lane or 1 year down the lane. It's not a good idea to implement automation in that area because it's going to be replaced, and eventually, those test cases that we automate are going to go waste, or maybe will have to be rewritten completely. So in that case, manual testing is going to be very effective. And because I call manual testing eyeball testing, right? And the most important advantage is, you cannot miss even a minute detail that's appearing in the application.
Adding automation to your test strategy, now or never. Let's go ahead and start with Praveen on this one.
So, like I said, it is very important to know when to make a switch to the automation. So we have to identify what kind of methodology is being followed, whether it's a waterfall methodology, water agile, or agile. So, depending on the methodology, it is very important to choose what kind of, the, the driven development is needed. So, for example, there are so many, methodologies in the testing framework itself. So it's BDD, behavior-driven development, CDD, checklist-driven development, DDD, data-driven development, defect-driven development, metrics-driven development, test-driven development, function-driven development, so many development ways. So it is very important to understand the methodology that's being followed in the company, and maybe in the team level too. So once we understand that, we need to understand the scope of the application, whether it is a mobile application, web services application, microservices application, point of sale application. Depending on the application, we need to understand the technology involved there. And not only that, the most important thing about identify when to switch to automation is there real ROI? But to start automating things, right? So let's assume that this is an application that is getting released like every 6 months or 1 year once, and it is not really worth automating that. So if there's frequent deployments and multiple platforms involved, multiple versions involved, then it's definitely very useful to start automating.
Great, thank you, Praveen. Frank, let's hear your insights on this one.
Yeah, so I don't see it as the word switch. I don't see it as a switch. I see it as a morph. I see it as something every organization needs to think about in advance of every development initiative, and it's rarely done. Is how do you morph parts of the application from exploratory testing into automation? What typically happens, companies aren't delineating between exploratory testing and manual checking. What starts out as exploratory testing in an app, and that's in constant change, right? You've got these release cycles, it's constantly changing. Then all of a sudden it morphs into manual checking on a stable app. And you've got organizational friction there to then change to automation. And that's something that going into an initiative, the organization really needs to think about. Instead of this big switch, how do we go into piecemeal, moving parts of the application that become stable into automation? So understanding that at the beginning and setting expectations with the organization that is going to happen. So I see it as start small and grow when ready. And the litmus test that I use to decide when to switch a functional subset of an application to automation is when there's less than 10% of functional changes for the past 2 sprints. So it's got some level of stability while you're still developing other functional areas. That functional area is stable, and back to what Praveen was saying, you can get an ROI on that subset of the application.
Great. Thank you, Frank. We'll go ahead and move on to Paul next.
Right. So from my point, I also don't see it, or for my part, I don't see it as a switch, but I also like to expand that definition of automation so that we're not thinking so much about test cases and test tools and things. I like to look at it as a judicious application of technology to help us do our jobs. And when we expand that definition that way, there's not a switch, there's not even a morph, there's not a transition. It's, okay, now I've got this big set of tasks that's going to help me deliver this software. Some of those tasks relate directly or indirectly to testing and software quality. A subset of those tasks are going to be good candidates for machines to help us do. And if you look at it broadly that way, you might say, well, I could write some sort of smoke script to check that basically I can purchase with a credit card or something like that if I'm running an e-commerce site. But a better use of my time might be to write some Python, Perl, whatever, some little sidebar script that's going to generate some of my data fill for me, that's going to make sure the system's up and running prior to me doing any sort of actual human interaction with the system. And we may get additional benefits that way because what we're doing is we're then taking the work and we're applying the right sort of entity to work with it, either a human entity or a technological entity. And we're not so bound into just taking what humans were doing and having machines do the same thing. We're letting each of these entities play to their strengths. Computer strengths tend to be doing the same thing over and over, potentially over transitioned data sets. What humans are good at is sort of the opposite, right? We're bad at that tedious grind over and over, crank turning type stuff. What humans are good at is critical thinking, lateral thinking, noticing pattern differences that are very difficult to deliver into a computer to say, look for these patterns for me. We're getting better at that at the computer level, but we're not there yet. Humans are just so much better at saying, oh, wait a minute, that was a little different this time, and now I should do this other thing. The computers might notice the difference, but that's where they stop. And they can stop there and deliver that information to the human. And the human, the tester in this case, can then pick up and run with it. So it doesn't have to be this pass, fail, all or nothing. It's automated or not. It's all about helping us do our jobs to be more effective or more efficient at what we're doing.
Great comments, Paul. Joe, how about you?
I knew Paul was going to steal some of my thunder on my points here, but yeah, I definitely agree. Our definition of automation isn't necessarily an automated test. It's any process that's currently manual that could be automated to help you deliver software faster with higher quality to your customers. Also, I get a little worried when people say we're going to switch to automation, as if like that's going to solve everything. In my experience, especially with large enterprises, if you have really bad manual tests, I mean, most likely you're going to create really bad automated tests. So it's usually more of a culture type issue in those situations that you probably need to get under control before you even start trying to expand into automated testing. Because the same issues you have with manual testing will be the same exact ones you have with automation. Automation is not going to save you if it's just a checklist on your definition of done. So when you know when to make the pivot is when your team already has a whole team approach to testing, and you know it's not going to just be one person that's responsible for the automated testing. So that's one definite thing. Also, if your developers are not writing automated tests or unit tests themselves already, then I wouldn't make the switch to end-to-end testing until you have that in place. So there's signs you could see of whether or not your organization is ready for automation. If you're doing continuous integration and continuous delivery, if you still need to manually build your application before you could run your tests, you need to do that deploy manually, then you probably really need to think about what your mindset is for your company and get it right before you put all your eggs into automation. Also, I've noticed there's this question about realistic timeline for ramping up. A lot of people have unrealistic expectations around automation. They think as soon as you start implementing automation, your velocity is going to go up. And it's actually the opposite. In the first few sprints, your velocity is going to drop down dramatically as your team gets up to speed with automation with the process. So it's something you need to keep in mind. Also, when I think of automation, I think of it as a wave. So at first, you're starting and ramping up. There's really not a wave yet. You're learning the tools, you're learning the process. And then people create their first test and things are going great and everything's running and your application's not failing. And then all of a sudden, you get some new features and then your tests start failing and people start ignoring it. And then you get near the bottom of the wave where people totally ignore the test. They stop blaming the tools and automation is not being good enough. And you need to write a new framework. Once again, and then they're ready. I don't mean to keep going to this, but this is something I deal with day to day. You just really need to be, and that's the culture piece, and it's usually the hardest. You really need to have everyone understand why you're going with automation, what it's trying to achieve, how it's going to help your customer, and really make sure it's not just a definition of done. You check it off, and people are just trying to get the stories closed. You really need to have that in place in order to achieve automation greatness. Also, if your application is not built to be automatable, then you're not going to be able to automate it. So your developers, your architecture really needs to be built with automation in mind. So having hooks in there so the automation tool can interact with it, make it so you could create big, faster tests by creating maybe a microservices approach really would help making your automation really better. I know teams that actually have gone and really rebuilt their software to use microservices so that it is more automatable. And usually most people are familiar with the testing pyramid. So I think of more of whatever test is the fastest, you want to go with it. And usually it tends to be unit test. And when you create more of a microservice type approach, you tend to get tests that are quicker, faster, more reliable. And usually when you start at the unit level, they tend to be quicker and faster. So those are the ones you should focus on first. And then if you can't test the functionality at the unit level, then you move to an API type level. If you can't get the functionality tested there, then you move to an automated test, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a full-blown end-to-end test. It should be atomic and really testing one thing, so when it fails, you know why it fails. I think if you do that, you'll have better luck overall with your automation approach. Also, you need to keep in mind that any type of automation is code, and code requires maintenance. A lot of people forget about that when starting on their automation journey. And so, you need to bake that into your estimates. Yes, it may be saving you time, but you need to treat it just like code. You make a change to your application and element ID, you need to touch your automation code. So it's the same type of effort, same type of rigor involved in it. So if you follow the same rigor you do with your code that you do with your automation, I think you'd be in a good way. Your automation would be in a great place. You get your team on board with this whole team testing automation culture, and you develop your test to be automatable to begin with. I think you'd be in a really good place overall.
Awesome. Praveen, you're up next.
So the most important thing about test automation or any automation is, providing fast feedback to developers, product owners. And not only that, the most important thing about automation is how do we improve the time to market, right? And identifying the application and the tool sets could be very critical. Understanding the methodology and identifying the tool set. If we do a bad choice of tool sets there, we're going to actually have a lot of maintenance issues. So a lot of times designing the test automation framework itself could accelerate the test automation process. So in my experience, I've seen that both test automation developers, test script developers, and also the framework developers, they both do the dual role, leading to poor test coverage and also poor test automation framework. So it's very important to isolate these process. Test automation framework should be developed by a separate team, and the test automation test scripts should be developed by a separate team, so that the feedback to the test automation framework team is much quicker, and the resolution is also much quicker. So these are very critical factors that contribute to faster path to automation. And like I said, infrastructure for automation is also very important. So deciding on the application and deciding what kind of infrastructure is needed to execute, whether it is outsourced or in-house, is very important.
Great insights, Praveen. We'll go ahead and go with Frank now.
Sure, and I'd like to pick up where Joe had left off or touched on, which is, all code is a liability, including automation script code. It's a liability. It's not an asset until you can actually add value to the organization. And the risk is going through that never-ending cycle of you start to automate. It's not maintainable, and we'll touch on this in the next question. So it's abandoned, which you end up having the liability far outweighs the asset there. In my view, the broad recipe for the automation greatness is to always include an exploratory test strategy, to automate functional sections when they are mature, to allocate time for script maintenance, and to leverage intelligent playback opportunistically. So I've covered the first 2 points previously, so I'm going to touch on the last 2 points here. So script maintenance, which was where Joe spent a lot of time on, is really hard to force the discipline. And one company that we worked with on this point, Joe, is they actually checked their Appium script into source code control with the application. So they made sure that it was maintained, that the script was maintained, and it was part of the process, which I really like that level of discipline, so that you don't end up abandoning the scripts. And tools also are emerging in this space to make script maintenance less crappy. Test.im uses artificial intelligence to create self-healing script maintenance. So when changes are made to the app, like an XPath change, it's automatically figured out and adjusted. And the final point is on record and playback. For mobile, it makes a lot of sense because you want to test against 50 devices to make sure everything works, but you don't want to write an Appium script. So you can execute something like an exploratory test and play it back on multiple devices. And Kobiton uses record and playback to produce its health check report. So we use Catalan to generate the script, and then we execute that against 50 devices. So we can detect, and we have an automated way or an intelligent way to detect when there are differences in the rendering based on screen resolution size.
Awesome. Okay, Paul, we'll go with you next.
Well, gee, what did y'all leave me to talk about, man? Well, okay, I'll get on one of my other soapboxes in a second, but I do want to amplify some of the other things that were said here. Yes, definite +1 on treating this automation like a software development engagement, because that's what it actually is. I'm actually doing a talk on this tomorrow night on treating your automation like software development, because that's exactly what it's there for. Also, maintainability, big part of it. We touched on some interesting things. I think we're going to touch on some more interesting things when we get to the AI slide here in a minute. But one thing that we didn't touch on is the cultural aspect of this activity, this automation activity may be directly benefiting testing and testers, the way we're crafting it, but really it's benefiting the team and the organization. It's helping deliver the product more appropriately. As such, it's a whole team endeavor, and it's going to work better that way. It doesn't really matter who types the keys. It could be a developer, it could be a tester, it could be a BA, it could be a DBA. Whoever has the skills to type the keys for the automation should be a candidate to do that work, especially in a highly cohesive team, like a really sort of a healthy Scrum team. It doesn't matter. It's who's next up. Who's next up that's got bandwidth to type the keys for this automated script. Great. You are now the person to do that. It shouldn't be looked at as a tester or a QA only job there. And we have to bring in other people, especially if we're looking at sort of an enterprise rollout of an automation initiative. Your product ownership's going to care. They're going to want to know where the time's going, where the money's going. Your release management and your infrastructure people are going to care, because you're going to be asking for access to software build change, and you're going to be needing machines to run all this automation on. Your legal team might care. A lot of times we like to go and get the latest, greatest open source tool, but how are we using it? How are we using it across multiple sites? Are we going to run afoul of any license restrictions there? Because remember, the code, the software for open source is free, but that doesn't mean it's free to do anything and everything you want to do with it. There are limitations, and certain companies, especially those in banking and healthcare, tend to be a little more sensitive around exposure of data, and licensing comes into some of that exposure of data aspects. So involving your whole organization, or at least the appropriate people from your organization, is key to a successful automation endeavor.
Fantastic. Great insights from everyone again. We'll switch to the very last topic here before going into a Q&A. Using AI and ML to compete with the Facebooks and Ubers of the world. Paul, we'll start with you on this one.
So I like the way you put the title of the slide here. It gives me another snide thing to say. So a lot of times I hear, hey, how's Google doing that? How's Amazon doing that? It is great. It is really essential that we understand how these companies are doing things, because we can get good ideas from them. But we should not lift those ideas and implement them directly in our organization, because most of us don't work at Facebook or Uber or Amazon. We're working at a company who doesn't have the resources at their disposal to be able to do some of the things that the larger companies and the more sort of experimental type companies are doing. We just don't have that latitude, that luxury, that that bankroll. We don't have it. So we have to do things that are appropriate. And that's the biggest thing that I counsel when I go to companies and talk to them and say, hey, we want to do things like company X, or I want to implement process Y. That's great, but is that appropriate for you? Perhaps we can't do that, or we can't do it that way with you. Let's do something that's appropriate. What are your business goals? Let's work towards meeting those. So I would take the competing with those companies out and say, how do we best use this sort of emerging technology, AI and ML? I mean, AI and ML to some extent have been around for a long time, but it's becoming more accessible due to computing power and marketing and other aspects there. How do we best use it? The same way we approach automation in general, which is I have a problem that I'm trying to solve or a goal that I'm trying to achieve. In this big stack of technology possibilities that I can take and apply with what I'm doing here, some of them are going to have this machine learning or AI capability or aspect to it. Are they good candidates for us? Can they do what they say they can do for us? Now, I don't believe companies are out there lying, saying things that their product can do X, Y, and Z, and they can't. I fully believe that they can in the right situations. It's just that not everybody fits every situation equally. So we have to take these tools, bring them in, try them out on our software. Because if it works on some other software or some demo site or some test site, that's great. That's a great proof of concept, but it doesn't show it's going to work in my environment with my software, with my people. It doesn't fit my context. Some tools will, some won't. So I think that's the way we should approach the notion of AI and ML, at least in the near term, the near to midterm, as another tool in the arsenal that's going to fit some of us for some situations.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to say, of course, I agree with Paul on this point as well. It's like anything, any type of tool or technique, you really should do a proof of concept with your whole team and run it through your whole process from requirements all the way to CI/CD, get the feedback and feed it back in, just to make sure that everyone involved understands what's happening and get real feedback to know whether or not it's going to work for you. So that being said, I was not a believer in AI ML-based technology until about 2014 when I started using a tool called Applitools. And I think the model Applitools uses is how I think of machine learning now in AI. And that is, when you think of AI-based solutions, what it really is supposed to take the drudgery out of testing. So the actual finding of things at scale that as a tester, no matter what, you would never be able to go through, say, 1 million server logs yourself. But a machine can. You would never be able to visually validate all the different elements on your screen. Even if you use Selenium, that's not a visual validation. It's just checking how HTML should be rendered. It's not even how it's rendered. So all these types of things, a machine probably is better than you are. But what's great about it, it's really a man and machine type approach with some of the technologies coming out now, like Applitools, like Kobiton, or your health check, where it may flag up things of concern or things that are abnormal based on previous history or previous runs. And then based on that, a human being goes in and looks at it and goes, hey, is this really an issue? Oh, no, it's not a real issue. This is a new feature. Let's mark this as this is the right one to use going forward. And you teach the AI machine learning algorithm as you go along. So I think those types of things are really awesome. I'm also using an open source tool recently called Report Portal. And ideally, right, all your automated tests should pass, and they should pass within 5 minutes, your whole test suite. But when I work for large organizations, I never see that happen. And the killer point for them is actually analyzing all the results from the automation test to see, is it a real failure? Is it a system failure? Is it a real bug? And using AI-based technology, this report portal can look at your previous runs and give you insights to say, hey, before this was a system error, so I'll automatically mark this as a system error. And then it leaves other ones to be investigated. So when someone logs into the dashboard, they know, hey, okay, I'll focus on these ones that really may be a real issue. So I think that type of thing right now in the early stages is going to be a big, huge benefit to testers in general to save them time. So I wouldn't write it off, but I would stop playing with it right now and get more familiar with it. And I think you really get some benefits out of it right now with some open source solutions out there already.
Hey, Joe, can you repeat what is it again?
It's reportportal.io.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Let's go with Praveen next.
Yeah, so some of the key things followed by top tech giants are building chatbots, using Hubot, ChatOps, and implementing the bot framework and implementing cognitive vision-based testing. So the key thing about chatbot is it improves the productivity and efficiency within the teams. And not only that, it could talk to CI tools like Jenkins, Bamboo, TeamCity. And what happens is the whole automation part becomes really easier. So it goes really well with the pipeline concept, which is the key for CI/CD process. And it is very easy to perform some automation around the area. So these are some of the key things that are followed by top tech giants. And cognitive vision-based testing can greatly improve the test automation maintenance cycle. You don't really have to go to Eclipse and modify, the DOM objects and stuff like that. You just have to, use the vision-based testing. And many companies have been working towards moving to the shift-left model by implementing defect prediction model using the deep learning from the historical results. I would suggest, try Apache Prediction.io. This is one of the one nice tool, and the documentation is pretty neat to implement, few template-based machine learning models, and also using open machine vision and open camera vision can also help in a lot of devices automation.
Great, thanks, Praveen. And we will wrap this topic with Frank.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you for giving me the first talking and the last talking point. Very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I could go on for hours on machine learning and artificial intelligence, but unfortunately, if I kept track of all the time that other people, I could have used all their extra time. So, but I will keep myself to 3 minutes here. So I always see artificial intelligence as the great equalizer for testing. And right now, there is a lot of hype and undoubtedly confusion around machine learning and artificial intelligence in the testing space. And it's important to understand that this is what Joe and Paul talked about, understand what problem you're trying to solve and how the companies you're going to partner with in the space are positioned long-term. The one area where I slightly have a different view than Joe on this one is, that right now, because a lot of the products are a little bit all-encompassing, right? You're committing for a really long time. They're not adhering. There are very few open standards in this space right now. It's still very early days. So finding companies that can that support open standards, where they don't tie you down to the framework that they're using, is imperative. You don't, there's a lot that's going to happen, and if you're going to invest 2 years, you can do a prototype or a proof of concept to make sure that it does what it says it does. But the market changes and products change, and other emerging companies will show up and displace those companies. So it's important to support open standards in this process. And so do they support open standards, and is the functionality that they provide isolated, or does it require an entire platform replacement, right? If it's that big, then you need to spend a lot of time assessing the tool. But if it's, back to how one way machine learning can help is prioritizing the tests to run. When tests were executed every 2 weeks, you could run all your tests. Now it's every day, and if you have automation set up, you can't run all those tests in a day. So prioritization becomes an imperative, and that's where I think machine learning can help. It's a very isolated piece of functionality that could fit into an existing CI/CD pipeline.
Awesome. And with your passion behind AI and ML, I don't think we'd be mad if you wanted to share a few more thoughts.
Well, the one other thing that I think Joe touched on a couple of times, which I firmly believe, is how the human and the machine learning algorithms work together. They augment each other. And we can't see machine learning as the panacea. It's not. It's only the combination of effective exploratory testing and the annotation, what I call annotation, on what the machine spits out that will make us great as testers. And it's the key to that is the user experience. How do you make sure that it's not this great break in the workflow between what the machine does and what the testers do? They should almost be fused in the workflow, where the actions that the tester takes or the annotator takes are very rapid, very brief, and then the machine goes off and does its thing. So I think that user experience is crucial, and I think so. That's that point. The second point is, how do we to the support of not making this over-encompassing machine learning platform that is believed to be the solution for everything. How do we find specific solutions that machine learning can help us with as testers? Whether it's prioritization of what tests to run, whether it's combing through the massive amount of image data that's coming out of these test executions and figuring out where, like Apple Tools is doing, where there are visual discrepancies, or whether it's combing through the load of the Google Analytics to figure out which devices I should be testing on because that's what my users are currently using. There's so many opportunities to use artificial intelligence, and it's exciting times to be a tester because of that.
Way to close that out, Frank. However, we all thought we'd be done, but I actually have one bonus topic for everyone. So I'll give you a lightning round of 2 minutes for response time, guys. And we'll go ahead and go in the same order that we just did, starting with Paul. But the question is essentially, what's one practical tip that you would gladly give to the audience as they go ahead and embark on their testing journey towards automation in the future of AI and ML? Paul, we'll start with you.
The one practical tip that I have, and it's the same one I've been giving for quite a while now, it's focus on value. You don't have to sit and figure out months and years worth of ROI. You don't need to do back of the envelope calculations are great. Really what you're looking for is, how can I help deliver this software faster, better, whatever the corporate goal is. Right, your corporate goal aligns to your organizational goal, which aligns to your team's goal. As a part of the team, we're doing some testing, and we're attempting to make the testing more effective or more efficient. That's where the value is. And if that value is not taking a, in quotes, test case and turning it into some sort of machine executable thing, you're actually automating some other aspect of the job that provides as much, if not more value, then you really should focus on that. And then test case counts and other types of metrics be damned, because the real metric is, did we achieve this business goal that we were attempting to achieve?
Awesome final note there, Paul. How about you, Joe? One practical tip for everyone.
So one practical tip, I'm a hands-on guy. Sometimes listening to things and just reading up on it, a lot of people could just get overwhelmed or say, oh, I can't do this, it's too much. Just start small, pick a tool, pick a technique, try it out, get some feedback, get your team involved, and just make it a good time, and just learning as you go along, and not committing to anything until you understand it and you've done it yourself and you see how it works within your environment and your context.
It's a great piece of advice. How about you, Praveen?
One practical tip that I have is, perform a lot of POC. So don't jump into one test automation framework or one test automation tool and start working on that. Perform a lot of POC. See which one fits your needs. And like Paul said, consider the value that comes out of it, right? So the value comes out only when you do a lot of POCs and then you come up with a tool that really fits your organization needs and also the goals. So, and also I attend a lot of conferences, because these conferences, are really great, because they open up a lot of, they introduce a lot of new tools, which we don't know. And until Joe told us today, I never knew about the report portal. And it's pretty interesting, So I attend a lot of conferences and a lot of webinars, and I get to know a lot of tools and do POCs, and that's it.
Awesome, Praveen. Frank, we'll go ahead and go with your tip.
Great, thank you. And it's what I said earlier, and it ties into, I think it was Joe who said it, it's start small and grow when ready. I think the start small makes sense. I think the grow and ready is, I'll explain a little bit. And I talked about this earlier, grow into specific functional areas of your application with automation when they are ready. It's not a big switch. It's when that piece of functionality is ready. When you grow as an organization, where you need to, you grow beyond the ability to use traditional techniques for visual checking, grow into tools that can help you with visual checking. So it doesn't need to be a big leap. Start small and grow when you're ready.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. All right. So with that said, looks like we have just a few minutes here at the very end, and we've got some great questions here. Any questions we don't get to, we'll definitely follow up via email and make sure that everyone receives answers to those. But to go ahead and get started, looks like the first question is, what is the best test automation framework for a web-based application? Who would like to answer that?
Me.
Let's go, Paul.
So there is no concept of best.
Amen.
When it comes to any of this. It's all about appropriate. What is appropriate for my organization? And as a consultant, what I recommend to team one or to organization one might be drastically different to team two, or it might be exactly the same because they are sufficiently similar that both will fit. So really what I generally counsel is look at your goals, your strategy, and make sure whatever you're going to do, whatever you're going to pick is in line with what you're trying to do as an organization. Look at your audience. Who's going to be executing the tests? Who's going to be writing them? Who's going to be maintaining them? Who's going to be consuming the results? And then look at your environment. Are you multi-operating system? Are you mobile, not mobile? Are you mobile only? All of these things are going to either increase or decrease the number of candidate tools that you have, and hopefully winnow them down to a reasonable number that you can start doing some prototyping against your own software to figure out what's the best for you and therefore most appropriate for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. All right. Similar question, but slightly different. What is one of the best programming languages as an automation engineer to know or learn?
So I'll take that really quick. I guess it depends once again. I just know it depends what your goals are. Java for me seems to be the one that's best documented. So if you have issues and you Google, you're most likely to find a solution. But personally, I enjoy Python better because I think it's easier to use. Some people choose based on their team. So if their team uses Java, then they write Java automation frameworks. So it all depends on what your goal is. But for me, I know JavaScript also is probably one of the most downloaded language bindings to Selenium now. So you can't go wrong with that either. So I say try a few of them. Pretty much what you need to do is learn programming with one of those bindings. And the API is such the same one, usually with these languages. Like if you were learning Selenium, if you learned it in Java, pretty much the syntax would be almost the same in Python or in Ruby. So don't let that stop you. Pick a language, learn to program, learn some automation, and go for it.
Yeah, I'll chime in one more there, Joe. I totally agree with everything you just said. A lot of times I hear this question from people who have done no automation before and they, in quotes, want to get into automation. Consider what's in your area. Look at the job openings. What's open at your company, what's open in companies that you want to work at in your area. I've noticed that some geographic areas prefer one language over the other, but just by looking at job openings, you might want to choose as your first language something that's going to help you get that next job you're looking for.
That's a great point, Paul. Same with you, Joe. Okay, next question. You were talking about functional requirements and their maturity. How do you know when a requirement is mature, and also when it makes sense to invest time in automating tests for requirements when they are not fully mature?
Yeah, so I can jump into this one. It's hard to look at a functional requirement in its maturity level until you look at the outcome of the application and how stable that part of the application is. So, I sort of see it as how much change is occurring in a part of the application. And back to the litmus test that I've used in the past is if a section of the application has undergone less than 10% change over a few sprints, then that has a level of stability that I would feel comfortable making the investment in automating.
Got it. Okay, next question. What are some great tools for test bots?
I'm waiting. The reason I don't have an answer is I'm still waiting for a good one.
Got it. All right. So keep looking, guys. Next question. This seems to be a good one here. A tip for an amateur/beginning automation tester joining an existing automation team. What are the things to keep in mind and how to not get overwhelmed in the beginning?
Pretty much all sorts of different things, but it's not just automation, right? It's on any place that you're going to go into a new environment where you don't have the expertise or the experience that the rest of the team does. Get a mentor, pay attention, ask a lot of questions, copy the good stuff that's there. Emulate what appears to be working very well, but also supplement. Because if you're being brought in as an individual, hopefully not as a clone of somebody else that's already there. So you will have additional insights and interests as well. Read blogs, listen to webinars and podcasts. There are lots of free things out there where you can get ideas from other people, but don't just pick up and run with an idea or a topic or a concept just because you heard some blowhard like me on a on a podcast. It's got to be appropriate, and I always keep going back to being appropriate.
Yeah, I would also mention you should speak up. The reason why I said I work for a large company, a lot of times people work for these companies for a long time, and actually having a fresh perspective will help the team. So even though you call yourself a beginner or just starting, you probably have certain insights that this team may not be aware of because they're so locked into their culture and the ways that they do things. So I would just make sure you speak up and contribute right away just by doing that. And don't consider yourself less than, but something that could contribute right off the bat to the team.
Also, try to understand the concrete stuff. Say, for example, if you're using the Java binding, understand the concrete or core Java stuff. Because that's going to help you in designing very neat and nice or non-fragile test cases. You could use collections, data structures, and enhance the whole test automation experience. So understand the core stuff.
Great feedback for that question, guys. We've got two more. I know we're about to run a bit over, so feel free to jump off if you need to as an attendee. Webinar recording will be available to everyone who is both registered and attended. But to go ahead and ask these last two questions really fast. Nowadays, many tools are developed with scriptless technology. What is your opinion on scriptless tools? And is it good to use scriptless tools over other automation tools like HP UFT or IBM RFT?
So for me, scriptless it's a bit of a misnomer. Not intentionally, I wouldn't think. I don't think it's maliciously done, but you get this notion of scriptless and extend it out to codeless. And what I would say is and ironically, it goes to the talk I'm giving tomorrow night. But I would say that if you're sequencing instructions, then you're programming. Okay, so you're not taking the programming out, you're not taking the logic out. You may be taking some of the syntactic sugar out, some of the things that may make the learning curve a little steep. You're pulling some of those out so the learning curve isn't so steep. But somewhere under the hood in that stack, there's programming, there's software there. And for you to get the software, the tool to do what you want it to do, at some point you may have to actually dive down into some code, or you may have some limitations. Again, this is one of those questions of look at your audience. And if your audience needs something at this level, if it's something at the scriptless level or nothing, then maybe it's the right way to go. But in general, if you've got an audience that can do some amount of programming and understand the syntax and handle some of the ick that comes with general programming languages, then frequently that's a better choice because it gives you more flexibility. But again, you have to do what's appropriate for you.
I would just say be careful with the approach. Try the tool, see if it works for you. It all depends on your situation, your context. But in my experience, I haven't had success with this approach, but there are approaches you can use like keyword driven, where a user that isn't a programmer can use keywords and a more technical person can actually create your library. I know a lot of new AI-based machine learning has record and playback, and that might work, but I don't think it's mature enough to really prove that out yet.
Great, great. And a great follow-up question, it looks like here. What do you think about beginning to learn testing with automation without any lessons in manual testing? So essentially, is it possible or recommended to build a foundation and test automation without first having done so in manual testing?
I'll chime in real quickly here. I think it's imperative that to go through the process manually and to test manually and do that for a period of time to get the knowledge of what needs to be tested when you automate. I fear that somebody who dives into automation without having a foundation of manual testing, even if it's for a short period of time, will miss some of the nuances that are necessary to implement effective automation scripts.
And I tend to agree. It kind of depends what your job is. If your job is to create automation or automated tools, then it would be helpful, but I don't know that it's critical. But if what you're doing in your job is you are testing software and sometimes you're using technology to do that, then yes, you do need to know how to test before you can effectively use that tool to bring benefit to your team.
So Paul, I was just going to mention that. Would you call yourself a toolsmith?
In the terminology used today, yeah, you would probably call me a toolsmith because I've spent very little time actually as a product tester. I tested a lot of software, but it's all been testing tool software so that we could provide it to other testers. Generally, in the places that I've worked prior to my consulting role, I've been more like an external supplier. So I had to understand what they wanted, why they wanted it, and that's how I got my testing acumen. But there are far better actual sit-down testers than I am.
So I would agree with Paul with that. Basically, it can't hurt. I mean, knowing testing, automation is testing, so knowing how to any aspect of testing is only going to help. But it also depends on your role, and I'm more in the bucket with Paul. I don't really consider myself a tester, more of a toolsmith kind of a technical guy for tooling.
Great. And the final question here, I just wanted to make sure we got this one in because we actually did a very informative webinar about a month or so ago about the future of AI and testing and what kind of effect that would have on QA people. But the question essentially is, will AI take away all QA jobs in the future? And before I let anyone on this panel answer, I do want to encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. Again, we have a recorded webinar of this very topic where we go very in depth on it. And I think that we answer it from all angles. But with that said, I'll go ahead and let the panel answer this question now.
Have you seen the Terminator movies? Now, so, and again, I'll go back to it's actually sort of a piggyback question onto something we talked about earlier, which is, do we see automation replacing, in quotes, manual testing in the future? And the answer is, I think all of this technology is going to replace aspects of what we do. Things that are crank turning, machines should be doing that for us so that we can do things that are more lateral thinking, creative, context sensitive type things that machines aren't going to be good at. And I view AI as a supplement to that, a far more sophisticated entity, something that probably can handle tasks that the traditional automation crank turning would not be able to, but it's not yet human. And in, again, my lifetime, my kids' lifetime, or career time, or whatever time span you want to put in there, I don't know that machines are going to be able to tell you that. I actually interviewed for a job once at a gaming company, and we were just talking about things that you should automate, shouldn't automate, can't automate. And what the recruiter said was, you can't automate fun, right? And I'd never taken it and distilled it down that way. But yeah, you can't automate fun, and I don't think a machine anytime soon is going to be able to determine what is fun and what's not, what's painful and what's not, what is going to make you use a piece of software or stop using a piece of software. So no, I don't see it taking away all the testers' jobs, but I do see it taking away some of the tasks that we do.
And I look at it slightly differently. I think it changes the role of the tester.
Yes.
I think that the exploratory tester, as I said early on, will always exist. But the role that the tester takes going forward is going to be, and I've heard it mentioned in this conversation, that this concept of an annotator, the person who's reviewing what the machine sees and validates it or amends it or says, no, go here, and then the machine gets smarter. So what the quality or the responsibility of the tester becomes higher up, just like in the Industrial Revolution when the skills increase, the skills of the tester as we embark upon this world of artificial intelligence and machine learning will also increase.
Awesome. Okay. Well, great questions, everyone. Really quickly before we wrap, I did want to just let everyone know that there is a webinar bonus for anyone who attended this webinar. We'll be sending out a very special infographic detailing the top AI and ML tools, as well as the rest of the landscape as far as mobile app development is concerned. And so we'll deliver that to you via email immediately after this event, so please be on the lookout for that. And as usual with our webinars, thank you all for attending. We sincerely appreciate your attention during this time. If you do have any follow-up questions or concerns or suggestions, feel free to send an email to info@kobiton.com, and we'd be happy to hear from you. With that said, thank you to our panelists, Paul, Joe, Frank, Praveen, and again, thank you everyone for attending. Have a great one.